Welcome to the Living in Faith Everyday podcast, the live podcast. This is the series of studies I've entitled 66 Books, 66 Short Studies that consider the 66 books of our Bible. And you've reached the book of 2 Chronicles, the book of the building of the temple. As I said in the introduction to 1 Chronicles, 1 and 2 Chronicles were originally one book. The name Chronicles comes from Jerome's translation of the Bible into Latin, which was called the Vulgate and was written between 385 and 405 AD. The title refers to the Chronicles in the sense of it being the recording of a sacred history. The author. Who wrote 2 Chronicles? Well, technically, Chronicles, both volumes, the author is anonymous, but tradition assigns it to Ezra, and there are many reasons for supporting that view. Whoever wrote Chronicles used many different sources, including the book of Nathan the prophet, the prophetess of Ahijah the Shilonite, and the visions of Adho. Also referenced in it as a source is the book of Shemaiah the prophet, and the book of the kings of Judah and Israel, the book of Jehu, and the book of Isaiah the prophet, and also something called the sayings of the seers. These wide-ranging references, well, many believe that was because the writer had access to a huge library owned by Nehemiah, and this fact is mentioned in a book called 2 Maccabees, a book that was written between the Old and the New Testament eras. When thinking about who this book was written to, the recipients, there is little question that Chronicles was written after the exile. The last verse of 2 Chronicles gives us the Edict of Cyrus, that which officially ended the exile and made it a thing of the past. Furthermore, the fact that the genealogies of Zerubbabel in 1 Chronicles extends at least to a point very late in the life of Ezra and Nehemiah, and the most conclusive is the fact that the work is described and seen to continue to the period after the return of the remnant in the cities and to Jerusalem. The date of its writing should therefore be seen to be somewhere between 450 and 430 BC, as the remnant were returning to Jerusalem, when the people were recognizing there was a great need to rebuild the temple. Message. The subject, of course, is the temple. Most of 2 Chronicles, chapters 1 to 9, is devoted to the building and the consecration of the temple. Chapter 10 to 36 almost omits the kings of Israel in the north because they have no ties to the temple. Prominence is given to the reign of Judah and the other temple restorers. The message is when God is present and acknowledged, his blessings are truly experienced. The structure of Chronicles falls into 3 main sections. Section 1 considers the temple, as I said, in the reign of Solomon and the building thereof through the first 9 chapters, showing initially Solomon's inauguration, then the temple's construction, and in this short passage thinking about Solomon's fame and also recording his death for us. Then through chapters 10 to 36 we have the temple during the reigns of the king of Judah, and the position of the temple through the reigns of 20 different kings is described for us in those 16 chapters. And then finally, as I said, in chapter 36, in the closing verses, it closes the book or the books of the Chronicles with the decree of Cyrus. Thinking about the purpose for which it was written. The purpose of Chronicles is to demonstrate that when Israel obeyed the ordinance of God, particularly the ordinances of worship, they experienced both God's presence and God's blessing. The 2 previous Book of Kings centered around the throne, but Chronicles focuses around the temple and the worship that took place there. Kings highlighted the prophets, Chronicles more highlights the priests. Saul and the northern kingdom are almost passed over, as they are seen as being in the unfaithful line. Elijah is only mentioned once, and Elisha not at all. Yet just enough of the evil is recorded to show that it will be and is always punished, and that explains the captivity. This book, 2nd Chronicles, and please remember that the two were originally in one volume, ends with the Edict of Cyrus, that which officially ended the exile. So the book, of course, must have been written after the exile. So in summarizing the whole book of 2 Chronicles, one might say, a writer, most probably Ezra, wrote to the returning remnant to demonstrate in the history of Israel that God blessed those who obeyed his ordinance, especially those who sought his presence through temple worship. This tells us God is present with believers, and when they acknowledge him, his blessings will be experienced.